Time's up, Admiral.
Here it comes.
Chevron 1, encoded.
For my ally is the Force, and the powerful ally it is. Life creates it, makes it grow.
You failed, Your Highness. I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
Cry hammer, and let's set the dogs of war.
Chevron 2, encoded.
Conan, what is best in life? Crush your enemies, see them driven before you, to hear the lamentation of your women.
It's on reflexes.
Well, I'll also say that you're heavy into martial arts, Tai Chi and all that killer stuff.
I suppose we have to register you as a lethal weapon.
Chevron 3, encoded.
And somebody ought to belt you in the mouth. But I won't. The hell I will.
Chevron 4, encoded.
Do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
Chevron 5, encoded.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Chevron 6, encoded.
Knock a while you can, monkey boy.
Great Scott.
Back off, man. I'm a scientist.
You shall not pass! I thought I'd die fighting side by side with Alf.
What about side by side with a friend?
The day may come when the courage of men fails, when we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship. But it is not this day.
Chevron 7 is locked.
Hail and howdy, everybody. Welcome back to Saturday Night Drive-In, where we take a break from the nonsense. Although, in a way, tonight we're kind of going to be touching on real-world nonsense just because it's timely. It's a timely topic with tonight's movie. But either way, it is still a movie. It is entertainment, and we're going to discuss it. And as always, I'm joined by the Ginger. Hi, Jed.
Hey, it's great to be here. Yes, this movie is incredibly relevant. We're not going to really dive into stuff like that, but I definitely chose this movie partially because I consider it to be very relevant from all the different problems that were being addressed back in the 1700s that are still very relevant today. Not necessarily, specific people or events or anything, but a lot of the same problems that they faced at that era we face today, which is why I think the Constitution is such a brilliant document, because it foresaw the timeless issues that our nation would face and didn't get bogged down in just the most relevant issues of their time. It's purely timeless. And of course, with little modifications with the amendments along the way, but this film just encapsulates that so well.
And that's the brilliance of this film, a more perfect union, because it is showing us that these great men, all of them in that room, great men, wise men who, after a lot of gnashing of teeth and yelling and screaming, understood that compromise is necessary. But understanding that, because we'll mention it when we get at the end, when Franklin is talking about it, it's not a perfect document, but they put in the tools to allow the evolution of it. And when I say evolution, I'm not talking that the Constitution is a living document, because I don't believe the Constitution is a living document. I believe that it is a static document that is a perfect framework that is allowed to be added onto to revise what is there to fit what's going on. But they understood that. They understood that they had to create something that would allow, as they repeated over and over again in the movie, the great American experiment to continue. So, Jed, this was your choice. Why don't you set us up for it? And of course, before we go, hail and howdy to everybody in the chats. We're glad to have you with us on this Saturday evening, where we hope you've had a well and safe and warm, still in some cases. It is still a little chilly out there, even though spring is creeping around here.
It's very cold here.
What's cold?
74 degrees today. It's ridiculous. I can't handle
smack
this.
You. It was 51 here. I mean, I went outside in shorts and a t-shirt to the mailbox to take out the garbage, and I was fine because I'm big and I hold my heat. But it's not anywhere spring-like yet. 70. Shut up. Shut up. God damn it. All right, so Jed, walk us through a more perfect union.
Okay, perfect. The other thing I want to mention is the reason why I decided to pick this movie is we've done a lot of spectacle movies like Sinbad last week with great spectacle, and those films are vastly enjoyable. But I wanted to try on this show to talk about a film that I think is pure substance. There's no spectacle, and there's one fight scene that you kind of get. It's not that great with the cannon fire. It's important, but it's not very well made or anything. So this film is all about the dialogue, all about the characters, and I think it nails its substance. And this film was vastly important to me as a kid because I watched this when I was very young, and it partially inspired my love for early American history. When I was 12 years old, I was a rabid reader of anything from the Revolutionary War I could get my hands on, and just studying. The Battle of Monmouth, for some reason, was a big favorite of mine, even though it's not that important. And just all the stuff from that era that I came to love kind of began with this film because it showed flawed men doing greater deeds than should have been possible at any era. And it really moved me as a kid. And I think this movie and others like it, historical dramas that show history in this positive yet flawed manner, are movies that everyone should watch. Not necessarily, maybe not this one, but others like this. They're very important movies that we need to watch so that we remember. Because these days we get so caught up in the rewriting of history, judging people of the past by today's morality, and that just doesn't work. Certain things, absolutely. There's extremes, but just day-to-day life, they did extraordinarily well with what they had and better than most of us could have done. So, go ahead.
No. I was inhaling.
I thought you were prepping to be like, oh, but you're so stupid.
No, I was inhaling.
But so yeah, a More Perfect Union follows the story of James Madison primarily as he puts together the Constitutional Convention, and they all get together and work out the details and make the Constitution as we know, with other players such as George Washington and Ben Franklin playing instrumental roles. And my personal hero of this era was John Adams. He only had a couple scenes, but they were great scenes with the minister in the UK. And yeah, it just follows that convention. It's mostly a single room drama. Most of the movie just takes place inside of Independence Hall, and it's very tight on the characters. That's one thing I really like about it is, you get inside the heads of these different characters. You have different alliances that are made throughout the film, and it primarily focuses on the difference between the large states and the small states wanting representation in the House versus the Senate. And it never vilifies anyone. Roger Sherman was, I believe that was his name, was a big proponent of compromise. And you thought he might be an antagonist early on in the film, but as it grows and evolves, you realize that no one is necessarily wrong in their opinions, but they still do clash. And I think this is a masterclass in making character conflict without vilifying anyone involved.
I agree. The strength of this movie lies in two things for me, which is why my score is going to be where it is at the very end. First of all, the history. It is mostly on target. There's a couple of things. I'm going to nitpick the hell out of it because I spent a semester studying the Constitution, and I've told you this story private. When we were doing it, we reenacted this, and we were all given roles. I got to be Alexander Hamilton. So I turned up my obnoxiousness to like 11 and was just boisterous, and I was a full-on Federalist in that. And there's my lead into my one nitpick. My first nitpick is they constantly say nationalists and anti-nationalists. The proper terminology was Federalists and anti-Federalists. So that was the proper terminology because a lot of this was born out of the Federalist Papers that were written before this stuff. So that's kind of my first thing is like, okay, I mean, nationalists, well, okay, Federalists, nationalists. Okay, I get what they're doing. Maybe people don't understand Federalists versus nationalists, but nationalists sounded better in 1989. We're just coming out of the Cold War. People understand nationalism better than federalism. Okay, I can kind of get that, but I wanted to hear the proper terminology. That's just me. But
no, completely understandable.
But they did get a lot of right. So the first part is the history is solid for most. I have one major nitpick, but we'll get to that as we go through the movie. The rest of it, of course, is it's a solidly written script. The delivery is solid. It's proper exposition when you need it, so that we know what's going on. But then, of course, we don't have the actual verbiage that was exchanged between these men in that room. But what we do have is probably their diaries, because just as an example, because neither of them were there, because as you just said, John Adams, he was ambassador at that time, and Jefferson was over in Monticello. He wasn't leaving. That's where he was at the time then. But just as an example, a lot of these men corresponded with each other tons of times, and in the end of their lives, there was a massive back and forth letters between Adams and Jefferson, who were oppositional during their time in government. They were on opposite sides, but became good friends and exchanged letters. So that's my example of those are everybody in that time were constantly exchanging letters, keeping diaries, keeping the written word down, what they did. So my guess is when they did their research for this movie, for the script, they probably got a hold of as much interactions, literary back and forth that these men had in their writings to kind of get a grasp of how they spoke, how they felt, what their positions were, so they could properly mimic what went on in that room. So, and of course, there were minutes. There were some minutes kept. We know that. So when there was actual binding voting going on, as the movie tells us. But for the committee meeting, they had to speculate. I think that's how they probably got it to feel so real, using the correspondence or the diaries or personal writings of these great men who were in that time.
Yeah, they had to extrapolate. And that's the problem with a lot of historical dramas, even the ones that do their best to recreate history accurately. There's going to be historical inaccuracies, mainly because we can't have all those records. A lot of these records have disappeared to history or never were created. But the extrapolation, I think, is very fair because, like you said, we have so many correspondence for these men. We have so many facts about their lives that anyone who's a study of human character can guess how someone's going to behave in a certain situation and depict it like that. So I think, yeah, we can't know word for word what happened during the Constitutional Convention. We know the big moments and who were involved in the big moments, and so you can fill in the gaps. I don't know the history well enough to say whether or not some of the small exchanges were inaccurate. I think for the most part it nails it, though.
That's forgivable. We're not looking at that. I'm when painting in broad strokes like this, that's what I want to see. This is a movie of broad strokes and approximation, and it's okay. But those broad strokes do miss a couple of things that I think would have made the movie stronger and balanced. But I'll get to that as we go through. So let's just walk through it, I guess.
Okay.
Best way to do it. So we start with Madison. We start with basically getting an idea of the friction of the country at the time. The revolution's over, we've won, but these confederated states are at each other's throats because they are acting as independent, tiny little republics, as they say. And of course, then that means each one's laws are different. So there's internal trade problems. There's international trade problems because the remaining great powers of the world are still encroaching on this baby nation that we call the United States of America. And there's zero ability for anybody to take us seriously because we're not a nation.
Yeah, you could not have called America a country at that point because there was no organization. This wasn't just the fact that we had a weak federal government. We didn't really have a federal government whatsoever. And I think that's why the first bit of this movie paints the situation very well, very concisely, because in the modern day, when I talk to people, the general consensus seems to be, oh, we won the Revolutionary War, and then we just kind of popped out the document, and it was all good. It was smooth transition of power, or smooth constructing the Constitution, and winning the war was the hard part. No, arguably, the writing of the Constitution, arguably George Washington deciding to go to the convention, arguably that decision was as important to the future of America as any individual decision he made during the war itself. These are times of conflict. Without the Constitutional Convention, we would have dissolved as a nation and the war would have been fought for nothing. So I put the importance of this era of the Constitutional Convention up with the importance of the Revolutionary War. Obviously, the convention never would have existed without the war, but they're both, I'd say, equally essential to America becoming what it is and surviving just the first decade of its post-war life. And like you said, international problems were starting to come in. England was the superpower of the world at this point, or Great Britain was the superpower of the world, and it was incredibly shameful for them to have lost a war against 13 colonies. These baby nations. There's more going on, but it is publicly embarrassing because in Europe, all the people are going to see is the headline saying, "America beat Great Britain." This is sad.
The funniest thing was this was a war that, yes, England had been fighting wars for centuries with other European nations, but they'd never had to literally do an ocean crossing like that to fight the war. So
100%.
It
just wasn't feasible for them.
They were always going to lose because in a war of attrition where it takes you 3 months from one ship to get there with more troops, it was impossible. But they would have won if we hadn't found great men like George Washington, who were brilliant strategists, or men like John Adams, who went out there and worked with other nations to establish lines of credit so they could pay for the war, or other men like George Mason and James Madison and all those guys, all those men who were in that room, the elder statesmen at that point who were around during the war. They helped make sure the war could be won by being where they needed to be. And that is why, as you said before, to have them then come to that room and sit there and come to the realization that everything we fought for, which is why Washington descends from Mount Vernon, as they said in the movie, he realizes, if I don't step in here, it's all going to fall apart. Even though he said, I steered the ship in, it's anchored, I don't want any part of this, but Madison kept Adam. Although I think the movie it should have given us a little more of that. It gave us some of it, but it didn't. The arrival of Washington was very sudden for me in the movie. I mean, you know what's going to happen because you know the history, but it's as though something was missing to let it be known that he was going to be there. I don't know. It was like
I think they wanted to surprise the audience, like Madison was surprised for the people who didn't know the history. But unfortunately, they are condensing a year and a half, 2 years of history.
Because that one of my other problems is that even though they do at times make it clear passage of time is happening, sometimes they don't do it well enough. Like suddenly Adams is in England and suddenly he's in Monticello talking to Jefferson.
I think they should have done that with a letter or something. Just they'd already been doing that. It was a little disconcerting. If you didn't know Jefferson was at Monticello, you'd assume, Jefferson's in England too, I guess. That's the natural assumption from the way those scenes were framed. 100%.
Yeah. So and then they do mention we've been here for weeks of that. I think the film would have benefited from an overlay of a date, saying like May 25th, so something like that to show us where we are in this, instead of just hearing we've been fighting for days and weeks, we're adjourning on this day, we'll come back on this day. Okay, we know where we are in the timeline, but I'd like to see something just flash across the screen so that I'm not wondering, because I found myself wondering, okay, where are we in all this? Is it just the next day? Are we further down the road? What's going on?
For the big jumps, I would definitely agree that you needed to iron some of that out. Some of the day-to-day stuff I think is fine as dialogue, but you're 100% right, especially with the Monticello one. That one definitely stuck out to me, is how's John Adams getting all the way to the States and back in the time
fast travel.
It was definitely fast travel.
He's wearing the same suit.
Yeah. That's why I 100% get why people assume Thomas Jefferson was in England for some reason or in France for some reason. But one thing I wanted to mention at the beginning is just like I was saying, Great Britain was ashamed of the situation, so they wanted to keep fighting the war without fighting the war, and they were the industrial superpower of the time. So what was more economic for them to crush America? Sending soldiers or having a trade war? For them, it was always going to be using the might of their industry to crush this little nation. And I love how that plays out. Quio Bono, that scene I think is great between John Adams and the minister, just talking about, yeah, Great Britain, we want to crush you. We're still in this war, just it's being fought on a different battlefield. It's being fought with money. Money is always the great decider.
They were using tariffs to try and alter the balance of power. It's as though that's a legitimate economic tool.
Yeah, it seems like it.
Wow.
I don't know anything about that. Ooh.
Yeah, and that America wanted to return the favor and say, yeah, okay, allow us to give you tariffs. No, I mean it's very relevant because this is, even though it's very short, it does give you a nice tight economic lesson that is still the same before you get bogged down by Keynesian bullshit in the 19th and 20th century. All right, where that Keynesian crap gets ushered in. So they give you a nice tight little economic idea of, okay, here's how it works. It's very simple. Tax, trade, back and forth. If you we want to repay our debt, but you're crushing us through tariffs. So why don't we? It's very simple. They get it done, and then it moves on to the nuts and bolts of the movie, where he says, if you want us to take you seriously, the minister says, take you seriously, you got to come back as a nation with a leader and a government. John Adams like, all right, fine. I'm going to go home and gonna tell everybody what happened. And listen, John Adams was a boisterous guy. It's not my favorite thing, but the John Adams miniseries on HBO.
It's pretty good.
It's okay. It's good. I've rewatched it a couple of times. It holds up, although it does have a lot of pacing problems. But it's an okay one. It gets a lot of the accurate historical stuff in there proper, which is important.
I just love anyone who is willing to portray the Boston Massacre in all its complexity, because that was a complicated situation. That's why I love John Adams so much, is because he dove into the complexity and was really looking at it as a moral issue rather than a nation against nation issue or a creed versus creed.
Yeah. So we get to the point now where now it shifts to James Madison, who is trying to make this happen. He's been studying all this stuff, and I know you appreciate when he's talking about Greek city-states, because that's essentially what the 13 colonies were, the 13 states were. They were a bunch of oversized city-states that wanted to all do whatever the hell they wanted. And
as much as
you know well in Greece how that turned out.
Oh, it did not turn out well. As much as Greece gave us so many incredible things, philosophy, the basic fundamentals of democracy, we obviously had to change that because democracy in its purest form is disastrous. But they gave us so many important things. The way that they were practicing democracy and their small city-states were disastrous. There was no coordination between the two, all the different cities, and they fell to the first real military might that swept through there. So yeah, it was untenable. That situation with the 13 colonies, just like the city-states, it can last for a little while, but the moment someone of any strength comes in, your lack of unity will make you fall in the wind.
And you mentioned what I think, the way this movie is portrayed, the key thing. Madison and the Federalists, they wanted pure democracy. They thought representation at all levels from the people was the way to go. And at first you think, wow, yeah, that sounds great. But then if you know how this stuff works, like you and I do, you realize, no, that they were wrong. That the pure democracy would have led to mob rule, and where the large states would have done whatever. If we had pure democracy right now, the states with the biggest populations in the nation, as we are now, all 50 states of us, they would control everything. California would rule the entire country as the most populated state in the nation. They would tell, because they would have the most sway if they had left it to the way they wanted in the House of Representatives and the Senate. California would do whatever the hell it wanted. Do whatever the hell it wanted.
And that would have been disastrous. No matter what the political
Yeah.
stance of the most populated states were, it would be a form of tyranny. The word was used hyperbolically in the film, but it's not technically wrong. Like it would absolutely be just them wiping the floor with the small states. Obviously, they make fun of Rhode Island and some of the smaller ones for just being irrelevant, but at the same time, their interests are different, and their interests deserve a voice as well. Because living in a big city like New York City has nothing in comparison to living as a Virginia farmer. They don't have the same needs, wants, or desires. So having that balance, as the film and the history ultimately ended up with, was a great compromise. This movie really shows that compromise was important. Compromise between great men make great compromises and make the best situation possible. You want the benefits of democracy with the benefits of groups getting their fair say. And so that's why the two houses of Congress were so essential in the making of this in the film.
There's a old line when it comes to making law. If everybody is not happy, if everybody is not totally pleased, that means you're on the right track, because the compromises happen. That means you're not going to get everything you want in this. And that is the thing. It starts with, because let's get down to the nitty-gritty of this. They all get in there because everybody's going to come as long as Washington shows up. And Washington shows up, everybody's there, and it boils down, like you said, large states versus small states, or a couple of small states that kind of align with the large states, like Maryland, because they're part of the southern bloc. But it's about population and representation and who's going to control this. And in one sense, the large states were correct. In a unicameral congressional structure, where you only have one single house, one chamber, a Delaware vote, as they say, should not be equal to a Virginian vote, because the needs of Delaware, as you said, are going to be different from the needs of Virginia. And Delaware is not going to want to do something that might benefit a larger population, blah, 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 blah. Point is, though they understood that, and that's what the small states understood, and they realized that. I know I phrased that wrong. God damn it. I jumped ahead in my thought process and I phrased it wrong. The large states understood that. Sorry, I rephrased. The large states understood that a population must be representative of the needs of their regions. But then the mistake is going with the pure democracy, with Madison's brilliant idea of a bicameral government, a House and a Senate, where deliberation happens. And they don't get into this in the movie because it detracts from it. But the beauty of the original document of the Constitution before the amendments is that it, down to the pinpoint nitty-gritty grains of sand, tells you how these two bits of government, all three sections, all three branches of the government, how they're supposed to work, how they're supposed to balance with each other. And they say the right word in this when they're at the dinner table: the checks and the balances. One is supposed to check the other. And Madison was brilliant in designing the bicameral Congress, where it's supposed to be deliberation, slow deliberation, not just single vote and done. No, you got to have both sides debating, arguing. In the end, as they finally come to it, where you have one side dealing with the people and the other side dealing with the states. And then they come together and find the happy medium that serves
it builds permanent compromise into the system.
Yeah. It's brilliant. Brilliant.
And then for the things that don't need slow deliberation, you have the executive branch to keep the wheels of power moving when there's not essential things going on, like the slow because with Congress, they've got to take their time on the important issues, work it out, find a compromise, find the best solution possible. But if all the government worked like that, if it got so almost bureaucratic that nothing was getting accomplished, the whole government would grind to a halt because nothing could happen. So you still need basically an executive branch to put some fuel, some gas in the tank to get things moving when it needs to be done. And then, of course, the judicial branch to make sure he's not abusing that power.
And back
it's
then,
a great system.
They needed the time, because we're in horse and buggy time, man. It took time, because here's the thing. Those great men who were elected senators and representatives, they had day jobs. This was, it was
volunteer work.
You served your state, you served the nation, and you went back to being a lawyer, a doctor, a farmer, a dentist, a doctor, all those things. You went back and did your business. You were not you were not what is turned into in our present day, the aristocracy of the nation, the political aristocracy, who are there for 40, 50 years, who shouldn't be there. You went, you served your term, or at the time, what everybody understood your term, because listen, it was over 100 years before term limits were put in place for the president, because it was the standard. If Washington only served 8 years, are you greater than Washington if you want to serve more? And nobody wanted to say, "Oh, I'm not better than Washington." I'm not.
For a long time, just the precedent of great man making a choice was enough to make it so. It wasn't law, but it was treated as law until a certain someone in a wheelchair decided he wanted more power,
or those around him. Those around him. Let's be honest, that certain individual was not that smart. He wasn't that smart. There's documentary evidence. There's a lot of stuff out there. People who want to say he saved the country, no, frankly, he didn't. But that's
frankly.
I realized it that. I realized that. It's natural. It happens. I'm that good. Anyway,
but yeah, those are the
sidetracking. Let's not do that. Another discussion.
That's one of the few things I think should have been in the original Constitution, is built-in term limits in the entire main structure of the federal government.
I told you when we did our mock Constitutional Convention, one of the things we put in, instead of right away, we put in a single 6-year term limit for the president off the bat. That's what we put in our made up Constitution, and we also put in term limits for senators, representatives. I mean, that's foresight. It's hindsight knowing it, but we put it in there because we're like, fuck it, we don't want that. Get it out of there.
That should have been in there as well. And the other thing that I always refer back to is one of the most important issues to George Washington, and I see it as the biggest tragedy of his death, is he fought for his entire presidency against the formation of political parties, because it creates undue division. You're automatically put against each other. Whereas even you see in this film, the Constitutional Convention, alliances are being made on different subjects. People are, it's an amorphous group of yays and nays. There's not a whole lot of set stuff except for on single topics like small states versus big state representation. But when you have parties, you're already ingraining that division, and he was totally against it. And then when he died, they posthumously assigned him to the Whig Party. That I see as incredibly disrespectful. That one of the most important things to him was robbed of him in his death. So I don't know if that should have necessarily been in the Constitution, that parties aren't a good idea, but I kind of wish that there was some basis for the rise of parties not happening.
Well, they spent time in the movie talking about why all their local governments corrupt because of this and that, and they basically describe the party system.
Factions.
They describe it very well. So the movie basically centers around the second, the resolution of the Virginia the Virginia plan, talking about representation, and it's all about how they can represent it in the House and the Senate. And while they do it, it does very well. And here's my biggest sticking point of the movie. Before they said we're going to table and come back because the smaller states weren't all represented yet. Although they never mentioned why New Hampshire's never there. They never mentioned why until the very end, the final vote.
Yeah, not with New Hampshire, but they do make fun of Rhode Island for never being there. It's like it's so small, it's irrelevant. They can't even put together a vote for their own representatives.
But, so the contention over representation, as we see in the movie, almost scuttled the whole thing. But there was another major thing in this that almost destroyed the attempt, and that was taxation and population counting over slaves in the South. Because the southern states, because they mentioned they get a little bit into it about slavery, this and that, and they quickly get by it because the slave owners, the slave states wanted to count their slaves as population, but not pay taxes on them because
all the benefit with none of the drawbacks.
Yeah, so they wanted to increase their number of voting power as large states because let's see, even though Virginia was kind of already moving away from that, the Carolinas and Georgia were not. They were full on Dixieland, going, oh boy, we need that cotton picked. So they were doing, I said it. They were doing that, and the abolitionist states, the North, they didn't want to bend the knee at all. And it reached a head where the Southern states were going to leave. Just like New York walks out during the fight over the representation, the Southern states were, as all of them, Carolinas, Georgia, Maryland, they were going to leave. They were gone until they came up with the 3/5 compromise, which it's a horrible thing to count a human being as 3/5 of a black man, a black slave is 3/5 of a white man, in order to say, okay, you can have your slaves will count as 3/5 of a white person towards your population, so that we can, and here are the taxes we're going to levy on you for this. And that placated South, but that was as big a point of contention as the representation. And the movie loses the most points for me, and my score is that they don't even mention it.
They don't mention the compromise. They only have real one conversation, one scene about slavery. I think that scene is really good because they deal with a lot of the hard things with that. The northern states are saying this is iniquitous, this is evil, this is vile, rightfully so. And then the southern states are like, you're going to cripple our economy. Like, they're putting forth, both sides are having really reasonable discussion, covering up any motivations behind it. But then I think it was one of the Massachusetts representatives said, hey, you who said it's iniquitous, you have slaves yourself. So the film doesn't shy away from the complexities of it. Because even George Washington have slaves, and it was a vile thing, and a lot of the northern states knew that, but they still benefited from it in one way or another. And the film doesn't go so far as to resolve the issue. It just talks about it in that one scene. It doesn't go into the compromise that you're talking about, but it at least addresses it without shying away from some of the ugly character. What are the most ugly things about what the Constitutional Convention talked about?
You're completely right, but for me, and this is me being a historical wonk, a political wonk on this stuff, it would have brought balance to the movie if you had shown the two major breaking points. It wasn't just about the representation issue; it was about the humanity issue as well. And that is, to me, historically speaking, it's missing from this, because as I said, it was going to break apart over the 3/5 compromise. It was going to, until they figured that out. It was just as bad. But so just to have it, to make us, people who are not educated in the history might only think the biggest contention point was this representation issue in the Senate, in the House. And it wasn't. There were other major points, the biggest one after that being the counting of slaves as population and taxation over them. It was big. So I don't think the movie is wrong for leaving it out. I just wish they could have touched on it for balance. Because the movie is about, clearly, democracy, or, to be more accurate, which is another point, they never mention that we're a constitutional republic. They never mention it in the proper phrasing.
I think a lot of that phrasing came after the Great Compromise.
True,
because, it would have been way more democratic with the plan that James Madison had. But, the pure Virginia plan. But I do need to interrupt real quick right here. We got a Beardo raid over on the YouTube and Kick side over on my channel. There's people flooding in. Hail, the Saska sisters are over there. Plenty other people jumped in saying, "Hail Ginger Jesus," and Adam, the old Scottish poet.
I'm half Russian, half Italian.
It's Sir Adam, the old Scottish poet.
I have zero Scotsman in me.
Oh, sorry. He's talking about himself. That's my bad.
Okay. Well, thanks for letting me know, because the way we have to set up, I can't see Jed's chat in the in the StreamYard because of the way he's doing it. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Hit those like buttons, everybody. Show the love. Either way. So, but yes, it's I don't hate the movie for not leaving there. I just would have liked a little more balance from the historical perspective, because I'll be honest, when I studied this shit when I got my government degree, we spent more time on the 3/5 compromise as a breaking point than the representation in studying it. Because even though the movie hoys this up and makes it feel like it's really big and massive, it was the last thing that they had to deal with. It wasn't the only thing.
It might be a matter of what feels more obvious in hindsight, because in the modern day, we take the difference between the House and the Senate for granted and think of it as the obvious thing. So it contrasts our expectations of the Constitutional Convention very well. Whereas if they had focused on the Three-Fifths Compromise in the same way that they had with the representative versus states, that would have aligned with what we would have expected.
But it would have detracted from the point of the movie, which I understand. That's why I don't get super angry. I'm just being historical nerd critical of it. That's all.
Oh, I'm that way sometimes as well. I totally get it.
The movie's about government and the building of government. It's not about slaves being people and as property. It's not about that. And that's why I forgive it. And I only take a couple of little bit of pointage off my total score for that. But the movie does get it through on how important it was for these men to understand compromise was necessary to create this new form of government that the world had never seen before, where you are protecting the rights of the people and protecting the rights of states, but those states are still coming together in a federalized government that will work together for the greater good of the nation and not their own individual needs and wants, which can be settled through laws, discourse, compromise, something that has been very lost in today's...
There's an art to it. The art of the compromise is 100% devoid from modern society. And we can't forget that some of the greatest things ever achieved in human history are through compromise.
Now, I think what's most important is that this being the late 1700s, certain political ideologies had not been born yet. And at this point in America, everybody wanted what was best for the country in the end. They wanted to protect the nation. They wanted it to grow. They wanted to prosper.
Most of them are just genuine people. Even if you disagreed with them, they were genuine in their love for this nation.
There were no evil men in that room. Like you said,
there was that one dude from, Delaware, who's like, I'm going to go to a foreign power to give us what we want. That was the only borderline thing, and that was just said in anger. Like, that's the worst that it depicts, and I think that's an interesting view of it.
Back then, it's American needs of influencing American desires. There's no poisonous ideologies influencing and trying to hijack the experiment, because every single one of those men in the room wanted the experiment to continue and work. They just disagreed on the path. And it's a miracle that they got it. It's a miracle as we come up, I believe, on our 250th anniversary of this nation in a couple of years. I believe that's the proper number. It's a miracle that we have gotten this far, considering how fast the world changed since we were born. Because let's be honest, all those ancient nations, look at England and France, they existed for over a millennia in various forms, but they still existed and continued to grow and spread about, and other nations around the world. And they've changed and collapsed in some ways. But the world was pretty stagnant in terms of its growth. It was paced out. You didn't have the massive leaps of technology we had, let's say, between 1800 and the year 2000.
Well, there's a term for that. It's called the 5,000-year leap, the period in which America, maybe not directly correlated to it, but the time that America's existed, we've made roughly 5,000 years worth of progress in 200 or so years, 150 years. And it's extraordinary that we've been able to survive that period of change, because there's so many miracles when it comes to the formation of the United States, from standing up to the biggest superpower in the world and winning. Obviously, there being the economic things that were put it against the British's favor, but then fighting through the chaos and basically anarchy of the years of the Articles of Confederation to form this document, getting everyone here to agree on this great document, and then to survive the 5,000-year leap, because that document, I think, despite what the world looked like, it predicted, like I said at the very beginning of the stream, the timeless issues that humanity faces. And no matter what the shape of the world is, those issues linger at the core of it. So we had such a stable, not living document. We had a stable document, a static document to keep us centered through that century, 2 centuries of change so beautifully well.
And at the very end, when Mason says, something bothers me that we don't have a Bill of Rights to protect he doesn't say it in the full way, but basically to protect the people from the government. But the document itself, the Constitution, was crafted to allow that. And in short order, the Bill of Rights was created with the first 2 amendments, which are the only reason we, the people, still control our own nation right now. Freedom of speech and the right to bear arms. Because we can protect ourselves by speaking out against what we see as government interference, overreach. And at the same time, if the government were to reach too far, we can defend ourselves. We will not roll over. We will not hide. We will protect ourselves from a tyrannical government. And that is why, for these 250 years, we have survived. The Bill of Rights protected us. And that's why, again, they all knew something was off, but they knew at that moment that was the best they were going to get. But the amendment ability, the allowing to not change the document, but simply improving it, adding on to it as the need arises. 2, free slaves. 2, all right, well, maybe women shouldn't be allowed to vote. Just kidding. I'm just kidding. But you understand that as the times
It's a great
change,
thing to say on International Women's Day.
Yeah, I've seen too many trannies being paraded about today on Twitter. No, I'm sorry. I'm not playing this game today. I didn't. I resisted a lot today, saying a lot of things on Twitter. I kind of kept my peace. Oh yeah.
I'm surprised you have self-control on Twitter.
I do. I mostly against the stands. I unload or Dermy. Dermy deserves every bit of hate I give him. But the beauty of the document, the Constitution, a document that is static yet is allowed to evolve and treat the necessary situations of the times. Because they even said that in the conversations. These times are going to change. We had the Articles of Confederation at the time we needed it. And now in these times, they don't work. We need something that is adaptive. It's brilliant. And I everybody should understand how the Constitution works. They should. They should read it, understand how our government works, how it's structured, what each thing means, and why we have survived this long as a constitutional republic. It's a beautiful thing.
Not as a democracy.
No, we are not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic. Every person that says our democracy is in jeopardy, they're an effing moron. They're an idiot. All right.
Getting back to the film, I think, just like you said, everyone needs to understand the Constitution, and this film is a great way to do it, or at least open the door for it, because all these complex political science talking points that we've gone over, all the different things about the document, I think are very well and very concisely put into the film in ways that that anybody can understand. And they use it with metaphors sometimes, like James Madison telling George Washington and that table full of people at dinner how he wanted the executive branch to work, the Congress to work, and the judiciary, using everyone's drinks and using fluid transfers. It is a great way to explain it. So this film encapsulates the beauty of the document, the important aspects of the document in an understandable way that you can learn about history without being overwhelmed by it. I think this film is incredibly well written. There's no spectacle. There's a low budget. I looked it up. It cost $500,000 to make. No word on what the box office is. But even in the 80s, that's a small budget. And they still managed to bring great actors to bear to give performances that move. I thought a lot of the performances were great.
They were
James
solid.
Madison, George Washington, and Ben Franklin being the standouts for me. And the minister for the UK in his two scenes.
They were solid. One of the things I found is that while I think the writing is why the performances were solid, but I didn't feel a lot of gravitas from much of anything.
Really?
Yeah,
I always get moved in the two Ben Franklin speeches near the end of the movie. The sun is rising speech, that one always gets me, and the one he did a few minutes before that, talking about this might be an imperfect document, but should it be perfect? We're imperfect men, and it realizes men's imperfection and accounts for that.
It's the good writing. That's why it worked. That's why I'm not hating the performances, because it's an excellent script and everybody gives a solid, serviceable performance. It's just I don't know anybody in this movie.
The only person I actually had to look it up. The minister for the UK, England. The one who said
he's somebody I recognize. Yeah,
he's the Sultan from Aladdin. He's Jasmine's dad.
Who voiced it?
Yeah.
I've also seen him in other things. I'm like, okay, I sort of recognize his face, but this is a movie of complete unknowns.
Oh, 100%.
And it doesn't detract from the movie, but I can't help but think one epic actor might have made it even better. But
it was a B movie. If you were able to bring a real actor of the time, like, I don't know, Sir Laurence Olivier in as George Washington or something, that could have brought the house down.
Yeah, somebody powerful, somebody, because the guy played Washington was okay, but I didn't feel the presence of Washington, the awe that he would inspire. I didn't feel it, and that's just but that's just my feeling of it. But what I said earlier still holds. The movie is held up by the history of it and an excellent script. And at the same time, also, the production value is decent because it looks right. The costume is good. The hair, everything looks right. It feels right. You don't feel like they basically cheated and rushed it all in there. But and so that's it. That's my only detractions of it. My major point of the historical point of this compromise, the average to normal cast and performances. That's about it. I don't really have much to complain about with this movie otherwise. So, you got anything else you want to throw in there?
No, when we get into final thoughts.
All right. Well, those are my final thoughts. So go ahead. Cheers.
Well, I think this film is a must-see, and films like this are a must-see, not just from a societal standpoint to help educate yourself, but if you're a student of good writing, this film is beautifully written. That's where most of my points are going to come from, because I think it's a very tight script, just with some minor issues like passage of time, like you mentioned, 100% fair, and the restraints of a 2-hour movie versus the year and a half time period that's being covered in it. But it does a great job with what it has, and we all need to see movies like this. The next film of this type that I want to pick, not for a little while, but pure substance over spectacle, is 12 Angry Men. I think this obviously not quite as good as that film, but I think this film falls into the same category. Yeah, important movies like this where it is drama, where it is character driven, where it is writing driven. This film is a great example of that, with the historical flair and the societal importance that it's still very relevant today. I'm not talking about political alignment from modern day definitions or party alignments or anything like that. It just like the document that's depicted in this film, it shows the timelessness of the Constitution of America, of the founding fathers, and I think we can't lose sight of that with all the division today.
So what you scoring?
So yeah, there is some issues with this film. The spectacle, while isn't important, there are ways that it could have been done better. There's that fight scene I mentioned at the beginning, near the beginning of the film, where it's sad. It's like 10 guys walking up a road and the cannon's like over their heads.
Into their ranks.
That's not a great scene. I think you could have just cut that scene and it would have been all right. But there is a failing of the $500,000 budget. Along with, there are actors who aren't performing as well as they could have been. So I have to give this a 7.5 out of 10.
Wow. That's my score too.
Wow. It's been a while since we agreed. We've done it before.
It's rare where we give the same exact
Very
score.
rare.
Very rare. Yeah, for all my reasons. Mine are mostly historical nitpicks and the performances. I wish they had been a little grander. That's about it. All right. So we're done. Now, in a complete 180, I am going to go for spectacle next week. A little bit of good old American jingoism. We're gonna go through that highway through the danger zone. Little bit of Top Gun.
Oh,
I
was worried for a second.
What? Highway through the danger zone. I was gonna tip you off.
No, that's what I knew what you're saying, but you said it's all spectacle. It's like, oh no, is he gonna hurt me? Is he gonna hurt me? But no, Top Gun's great.
No, we're staying in the 80s, baby. We're gonna do some Top Gun, Tom Cruise, Jester's dead. Yeehaw! Jester's dead. All right, so join us next week for another drive-in. If you are watching us live right now on my channel, you will be directed over to later tonight, Ballbusters Gaming Among Us, where shenanigans will happen, and I apologize for nothing I will do over the 3 to 4 hours where we all murder each other over and over again. So thank you, everybody. We hope you had a good time. Best way to show that is to hit those like buttons, subscribe to the channels, and we'll see you guys next time. Until then, everybody, take it easy. Have a good night or day wherever you may be.